In 1865, the American Civil War finally came to an end, and Bill Watson, a veteran of the Union Army, returned home. At first he came back smiling, relieved to be alive. But after only a few days, that smile began to fade. He had seen too much. He had watched his best friend die. He had felt the sting of knives in close combat. He had listened to wolves in the forest, tearing at the bodies of dead soldiers. He had heard the screams of abused women and children. War was filthy, and Bill Watson knew that truth better than most. He lived alone in a small wooden cabin on a plot of land so overgrown it barely resembled anything owned by man anymore. His home was near the small historical town called Seattle, Portland, a place that had been called to war. The people there now looked at Bill as nothing more than a washed-up drunk, a man wasting whatever life he had left. As the nightmares of war grew stronger, Bill began to drink more and more, trying to drown out the memories clawing at the edges of his mind. One night, deep in a haze of alcohol, he began to hallucinate. Convinced someone was attacking him, he grabbed a whiskey bottle and smashed it against the wall, shards flying like shrapnel. Then the strength left him, and he fell to his knees, sobbing, no matter how hard a man he believed himself to be. In that moment, he muttered, through tears and clenched teeth,
"Either I heal myself or no one ever will. I'm sick and tired of this world. I want to find peace."
Disappointed in himself and disgusted with the world, Bill did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat at his old wooden table, smoking cigarette after cigarette, while watching the fireplace, thinking about his next move. He had already lost 2 years to alcohol since coming back from the war, and he is refusing to lose another one. It was a chilly morning in 1867. Bill Watson sat at his table, smoking cigarette after cigarette, before finally stepping out of his cabin into the crisp air. With a bitter look, he watched the townsfolk go about their day, indifferent and distant. He walked slowly to the small general store to buy bread and some dried meat. The shopkeeper, a stout man behind the counter, greeted him cheerfully.
"Morning, Bill. We just got a new shipment of whiskey. Care to try a bottle?"
Bill shook his head.
"Not today."
The man raised an eyebrow.
"Not even a little? Surprising after, well, you know."
Bill's eyes fell on a paper poster tacked to the wall. "Alaska is ours." He nodded slowly.
"I heard about that. America bought Alaska from Russia, right?"
The shopkeeper said, smiling.
"That's right, big news. The Russians were ready to sell, and Seward made it happen. They say it's full of fur, gold, and wilderness."
Bill gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and paid for his food. As he made his way back to the cabin, he saw his property, overgrown, wild, and abandoned to time. The townspeople barely spared him a glance. That moment, standing amidst the tangled grass and weeds, Bill made his decision. He would go to the town office, sell the cabin and the land, and leave everything behind. That day, Bill sold everything. He returned to his cabin, donned his old military jacket, and trimmed his long, unkempt hair and beard. He packed a small backpack with a few essentials, including a sturdy knife, and prepared himself for the journey he had long imagined. With a determined stride, he made his way to the port. A large merchant ship was preparing to set sail for Alaska, its sails billowing in the morning breeze. Bill climbed aboard, feeling a mixture of anticipation and relief. The voyage was long and grueling. For 2 weeks, the ship carved its way along the northern Pacific, through cold winds and misty waters. Bill spent much of the time on deck, staring at the horizon, thinking of the life he had left behind and the vast, untamed wilderness that awaited him. By the time they sighted the rugged coastline of Alaska, Bill felt a renewed sense of purpose. The forests, Mountains and endless snow promised both hardship and freedom, everything he had been searching for. When Bill stepped off the ship onto the wooden docks of Kodiak, he felt both lost and strangely determined. The air was colder than he expected, sharp and salty from the sea. Russian-built houses lined the shore, low and sturdy, with smoke rising from chimneys. A few elite fishermen hauled nets nearby, and American soldiers in thick coats watched the harbor with the uneasy authority of newcomers. Bill slung his pack over his shoulder and walked along the muddy path into town. Everything felt foreign. Different language, different faces, different rules. But the wilderness beyond the settlement called to him stronger than anything ever had. He found the local trading post, a creaking wooden building with pelts hanging from the rafters. Inside, the smell of tobacco, tanned hides, and old wood filled the room. The merchant behind the counter looked up, eyes tired but observant.
I'm looking for a rifle,
Bill said.
something strong enough for bears.
The merchant studied him for a moment, then placed a Winchester Model 1866 on the counter, wiping the barrel with a cloth.
This one's cheaper than a Hawken.
He said.
Not as powerful, but it fires fast. Good rifle for a man starting fresh.
Bill brushed his hand along the stock, thoughtful.
Have you ever had to kill one?
The merchant's expression hardened. His voice dropped.
I had to.
He said.
It killed my son.
Bill didn't move.
I wasn't there in time. Found the tracks first. Then I found what was left.
He swallowed.
I shot the bastard in the head, then I jumped on it and stabbed it. Maybe 160 times, maybe more. I didn't stop until the knife handle snapped.
He met Bill's eyes, full of fire and hurt.
I'd fight one with my bare hands if I could bring my boy back.
Silence settled between them. Bill nodded once, not out of agreement, but respect, and set his money on the counter. The merchant wrapped the Winchester, added a box of cartridges, and slid them toward him with a quiet hand. Bill took the rifle and stepped back into the cold air outside, exhaling slowly. He didn't feel ready, but he had already left his old life behind. There was only forward now. Bill saw the stable and knew he would need a horse. The seller was brushing one of the animals.
Morning, friend.
The man said.
Looking for a mount?
I need one strong and durable, something that can handle the cold.
And what for exactly?
The mountains.
Oh, so you're going to play trapper too, huh? Most who try don't come back. Wolves, bears, the cold, and worst of all, the Indians.
He shook his head.
I couldn't live like that.
Bill didn't answer. He just looked at him, quiet and unreadable.
All right, let's see.
He raised a lantern and led Bill deeper into the stable.
This here's my best horse for that kind of life. Fearless, strong, stubborn, a black Mustang.
Bill stepped closer and ran his hand along the horse's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the coat.
Yeah, I like this one. What's the price?
That'll be $350.
Bill reached into his coat, counted out the money, and placed it in the man's hand without a word.
Glad doing business with you.
They shook hands, and Bill took the horse's reins, leading the Mustang through the settlement. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, dogs barked in the distance, and the cold evening light dimmed the edges of the town. He walked until he reached a cramped little shop tucked between two storage sheds. The fur dealer. Inside, the air smelled of hides, smoke, and something faintly metallic. The owner, a wiry old man with sharp eyes, glanced up from a pile of stitched pelts.
Looking for something specific?
He asked.
I need warmth. Thick hides. Mountain kinda cold.
These are fresh, white-tailed deer hides, tough and warm. And that blanket there is heavy wool and woven tight. Keeps the cold out.
The man nodded and motioned toward a rack. Bill picked out 2 hides in the blanket. As he laid them on the counter, the old man studied him a moment.
You headed far? For a trip like that, you'll want a real knife. Not some store toy. Something that cuts through bone.
He reached beneath the counter and placed a knife in Bill's hands. It was a beautiful piece. Polished steel, the handle carved from deer antler, hollowed through the center. Inside, tucked neatly, were a small flint and a fishing hook. Bill turned it over slowly.
Truly a beautiful knife, but it's a little too expensive for me. If you give it to me for a lower price now, I'll make it up to you later with a bear hide, once I get one.
The old man let out a short, rough laugh, amused and perhaps a bit impressed.
I'll hold you to that, young man. Good luck.
Bill paid what he could, slid the knife into his belt, and stepped back outside. Night was beginning to fall, slow, blue and cold, and somewhere beyond the fading light, the mountains waited for him. Bill woke to the sound of voices drifting in from the market street, mixed with the sharp barking of dogs somewhere in the settlement. For the first time in a long while, he rose feeling rested, almost energized. He had rented a small room in a modest lodge at the center of town. He dressed quickly, strapped on his gear, and stepped outside. Frost still clung to the shaded corners of the buildings, but sunlight was already spreading across the settlement, turning the rooftops pale gold. The black Mustang lifted its head when it heard him approach. Bill brushed its neck and whispered a quiet greeting before giving it some feed from a small sack.
Easy, boy.
The horse chewed steadily, warm breath rising in soft clouds. The day was cold but bright, the sky clear and blue. It felt like the right kind of morning to begin something new. Before leaving the settlement, Bill stopped by a row of market stalls. A trapper was selling iron traps of different sizes, and Bill picked out several sturdy ones. At the next stall, he bought a hand axe, small but heavy enough to split frozen wood, and a few other small necessities he knew he would need in the mountains. With the last of his errands done, he tightened the straps on his pack, mounted the Mustang, and guided it toward the path leading out of town. The noises of the settlement began to fade behind him, replaced by the distant quiet of the wild.
Come on, boy.
Betting on forgetting all the troubles that
Easy.
you. The trail was wide and narrow. The eagle or the sparrow showed the path he was
Good
to
boy.
follow as it flew. A mountain man's a
Whoa,
lonely man,
whoa,
and he needs
easy.
a light behind. It ought to have been different, but you oftentimes will find that the story doesn't always go the way you had it in mind.
Bill enjoyed the wilderness and the clean, sharp air, proud of himself for turning a new page in life. Bill knew the beginning would be brutal, but he also knew he was finally walking a path he chose himself. No more army, no more orders, no one telling him where to stand or where to go. Just him, his horse, and the Winchester he paid a high price for. Too weak for a serious bear, but reliable for smaller game. The Hawken he wanted remained only a dream, at least for now. He rode into the mountains and wide forests as the day began to dim. The temperature dropped, and the sky slowly shifted from blue to a heavy leaden gray. When he spotted a cluster of fallen pines, he stopped his horse and stepped down. This would be his camp for the night. It wasn't ideal, but in the wilderness, little ever is. He cleared the ground of needles, gathering small dry twigs, grass, and leaves. While working, his eye caught a pale strip of white bark, a birch tree. That pleased him more than he'd admit. He pulled out his knife and carefully shaved it, layer by layer, making fine, light shavings. Birch always burned well, full of natural resin and quick to take a spark. When the fire finally flared to life, Bill felt his shoulders loosen for the first time since morning. Then he began building a shelter. He raised the fallen pines slightly off the ground and arranged them as a base, then constructed a roof and walls over them. Everything was covered with dense pine branches to hold in warmth and serve as insulation against the fast approaching night. When the fire grew into a broad, steady flame, he took the shovel he had bought at the market and began transferring hot coals into a small pit he had dug. Once he layered the coals thickly, he covered them with a thin layer of earth, just enough to let the heat breathe, but stay trapped. Over that, he placed the deer hides he had bought. It would keep him warm. Before wrapping himself in his wool blanket, he brewed pine needle tea in a small metal pot. The warm scent of resin lifted into the air. He sat by the fire, sipping tea and chewing dry meat, listening carefully to the forest. Every sound mattered. The crack of a twig, a distant call, the sharp snap of frozen bark. The forest changed at night. It became something else, more intimate, more dangerous. His rifle rested within arm's reach, his knife at his side. Only then could he relax. The Winchester wasn't the Hawken he wanted, not something that could stand up to a giant bear, but it would do for rabbits, foxes, and anything that could offer him food or fur. The otter pelt, he thought of it often. It was the most expensive thing the trader had, and Bill dreamed that such catches would one day earn him enough to build a proper cabin deep in the woods where no one would look for him. As the fire danced before him, Bill stared into the darkness of the forest. He didn't know what waited out there, but he knew one thing. There was no turning back, and he would do whatever it took to make his dream real. Bill woke with the first light of dawn. He packed his belongings and continued on his journey with his horse. Now he led the animal by the reins.
Easy.
Everywhere he looked, he saw the delicate footprints of a fox, scattered marks of a marten, and near small streams, the prints of geese and ducks. Then he came upon enormous tracks, bear tracks. He froze, his heart pounding. Never in his life had he seen prints so vast, and he could only imagine the size of the creature that had made them. The tracks looked fresh, and without hesitation, he decided to change direction, taking a different path. As he walked with his horse, wildlife was scarce. Only the occasional fox darted through the trees, and flocks of ducks and geese occasionally crossed the narrow valleys above him. Memories of the stories he had heard flooded his mind, reminding him of the river and the places where the most valuable fur, that of the otter, could be found. The next morning, snow began to fall. A creeping panic settled over him,
Come on,
the fear that he might not survive the winter gnawing at his resolve. Hours passed as he trudged over the hills, each step heavy with snow and cold, until in the distance he spotted a log cabin, half buried beneath the white blanket. Approaching cautiously, he moved as if every shadow might hide a sudden threat. The door had been broken down. Inside, the cabin was abandoned, thick with cobwebs, and shattered window frames bore witness to a past struggle. Yet there were no bodies, no signs of life beyond the lingering sense of chaos. In the center of the room stood an old stone hearth, long cold. Night approached, and Bill had no choice but to claim this shelter. He immediately set about preparing for the long, freezing night. Clearing snow from around the cabin, he felled a few thin pines, stripped them of branches as best he could, and used the logs to extend the roof outward, creating a makeshift lean-to for his horse. With the boughs, he covered this new overhang, fashioning improvised walls to shield the animal from the wind and snow. Next, he repaired the cabin door. As darkness fell, he lit a fire that quickly warmed the wooden interior. He discovered a makeshift bed and layered his furs and blanket upon it. On a shelf, he found a few half-burned candles, which he lit, casting a soft glow across the cabin. He also noticed a nearly empty bottle of whiskey. He hadn't touched alcohol in months, but allowed himself a single sip. It was a quiet promise to himself. Never again would he drown in drink, only to use it sparingly, for warmth, for comfort, or to cleanse a wound. The cabin contained a rickety table and a chair on the verge of collapse, clearly built by amateur hands long ago. While exploring, his eyes fell on a pair of snowshoes hanging on the wall. Beneath the bed he found gunpowder, laid bullets, and finally an old Hawken rifle, designed for black powder. Joy surged through him. He had always dreamed of owning such a rifle, and now, holding it in his hands, he felt a rush of triumph. His happiness, however, was interrupted by the howl of the wind outside. Opening the door, he was immediately pelted by snow in the eyes. He rushed to check on his horse, already nearly buried in the growing drift. He returned inside to fetch a warm woolen blanket. Carefully, he cleared the snow off the horse, covered it with the blanket, and layered both deer furs over it, hoping to shield it from the bitter cold. Only then did he return inside, settling near the fire. Relief and contentment battled with worry for the animal he depended on. He was overjoyed by the discovery of the rifle, yet he didn't pause to consider why the cabin had been abandoned or who had broken down its door. For now, the warmth of the fire and the shelter of the cabin were enough to keep him safe from the storm that raged outside. In the middle of the night, a violent gust of wind pushed the cabin door slightly ajar, and Bill woke instantly. He dressed in a hurry, pulled his hat onto his head, and stepped outside, anxiety tightening in his chest. Snow had piled high against the entrance, and he struggled to push his way through, but he forced himself onward until he reached his horse. To his relief, the animal was still alive, shivering but standing strong. Bill searched the far side of the small cabin and found an old pot half buried in the snow. He filled it with handfuls of snow, melted it over the fire, and warmed the water until steam rose from its surface. Then he added a pine branch with needles still clinging to it, making a crude but comforting tea. He drank a little to steady himself and gave the rest to the horse, hoping the warmth would help it endure the night. At that moment, the horse felt like his closest friend, and Bill vowed he would protect it for as long as necessary. By morning, the snowfall had finally stopped. Bill carved a path through the drift again and led the horse out from beneath the makeshift shelter. He immediately set to work repairing the lean-to he had thrown together the previous evening. Nearby, the horse used its hooves and nose to clear snow from the ground, nibbling at the buried grass. Bill reinforced the structure, layering it with more pine branches until it was far better insulated. He planned to improve it further when he had the time. After that, he went back inside and continued fixing the cabin door, only then noticing deep scratches from claws and teeth gouged into the wood. A bear had done this, a massive one. The same beast, Bill realized, that had killed the trapper and dragged the body far from the cabin. The thought made his blood run cold. He strengthened the door, secured the windows, and promised himself he would build a sturdier pen for the horse as well, one with log walls and a reinforced gate. He could only hope that the beast was now deep in hibernation, not prowling hungry through the forest. Bill needed to be ready. Later that day, he spotted a calm stretch of river not far from the cabin and decided it was the perfect place to set traps for otters. Around the cabin, he laid out 2 heavy bear traps he had bought from the trapper. He also set smaller snares along logs and bent branches, hoping to catch martens, whose pelts were valuable as well. While placing one of the snares, something gray stirred in the bushes. Bill quietly pulled out his Winchester and took aim. A beautiful fox emerged, its coat a dark, smoky silver. He fired. The animal dropped instantly. Bill hurried over, lifted his prize, and laid the fox across his horse. His first catch, and a lucrative one. Fox fur, especially silver or charcoal gray, fetched a high price. 2 months passed. Bill learned to catch ducks and fish to feed himself. There was little else on the menu. He trapped 14 foxes, 9 otters, and 7 martens, 4 white, 3 brown. He had already prepared the pelts and even crafted a warm fur cap from one of them, something that would protect his ears far better than his old hat. The snow was beginning to melt, spring creeping slowly into the mountains. Yet one thought haunted Bill endlessly. Would the man-eating bear return to its hunting grounds? Was it already awake? Already out there? Bill couldn't know it yet, but he knows they will meet soon. It was the first day of spring. The last patches of snow on Kodiak Island were sinking into the soil, turning the ground dark and wet as the sun climbed a little higher than it had in months. Bill came down the trail toward his cabin with a grin on his face, leading his black Mustang by the reins. On the horse lay 3 otters, 2 foxes, and a bundle of fresh fish for dinner. It had been a good season for him, maybe the best since he had come to these wild lands. If he managed to sell all those furs, he would walk into town a rich man. But the closer he came to the clearing, the more that spring morning felt wrong. He noticed them right away. Fresh tracks in the soft mud, massive paw prints, too big for any normal bear. His stomach sank. He knew exactly who they belonged to, the killer bear, the same one that had torn apart a trapper last winter. Bill reached for his old Hawken rifle, pulling it from the scabbard on the horse. He held it ready as he walked the last stretch toward the cabin. The forest was quiet but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that follows something dangerous. When he reached home, he made a big fire outside and started working fast. He skinned the otters and foxes, scraping the fat from the hides, rubbing them with ash, black powder, and sand. He stretched and bent hazel branches into circles and lashed the hides inside them with strips of old cloth, setting them in the sun to dry. But the whole time he was restless, turning his head at every sound. He knew the bear would return. Those tracks were too fresh. He moved the Mustang under the overhang and reinforced the door with thicker logs. Then he worked with his axe, cutting rough steps into a fallen trunk to make a quick ladder. He placed it against a tall spruce. From there he could wait and get a clean shot straight to the head. The sun began to sink behind the mountains. Warm orange light filled the clearing and then slowly faded. The last birds chirped and went quiet. Bill climbed the tree, Hawken in his hands, Winchester slung on a branch beside him. The forest became still. No wind, no rustling. Only the smell of smoke, melted fat, and fish lingering in the air. Then it came. A thunderous roar that rolled through the valley and made the entire forest fall silent. Bill felt the bark under his hands tremble. The light was almost gone. Shadows swallowed everything between the trees. He heard branches snapping, heavy breathing, slow, deliberate footsteps. The Mustang grew restless beneath the overhang. Bill clenched the stock of his rifle. The bear was circling the clearing, close but invisible in the darkness. And then it stepped into the glow of the fire. A massive Kodiak with thick fur and claws that looked like hooked knives. It didn't even look at Bill at first. It went straight toward the horse. Bill raised the trigger on a Hawken. The faint click echoed more than he expected. The bear stopped. Its head turned slowly toward the tree. It stared directly up at him. That was when Bill understood. This was the same bear, the killer, and it knew exactly what that sound meant. Bill took aim and leveled his sights at the bear's head, and then he fired. The Hawken roared like thunder, the recoil slamming into his shoulder as a cloud of thick, dirty smoke swallowed him whole. Sparks spat from the muzzle and drifted down like angry fireflies. For a heartbeat, Bill couldn't see anything. Not the ground, not the tree, not even his own shaking hands. But he heard it. A deep, rumbling growl, the kind that vibrates through bone. When the smoke finally thinned, the scene snapped into place. The bear was already charging the tree. Not just running, charging, hurling its entire bulk forward with terrifying speed. The shot had hit, but only gouged a burning wound along the thick muscles of its neck. The bear let out a roar that tore the air apart. Birds exploded out of the surrounding trees. Bill felt the sound in his ribs. Then the animal slammed into the trunk. The whole tree shuddered, moving violently. Bill's boots slipped. He wrapped both arms and one leg around the trunk, just in time to keep from falling. The wood groaned under the impact. It was like being on a mast during a storm. The beast reared up and struck the tree again, this time raking it with its claws. The bear's hot breath blasted upward, rank with earth and old blood. It snapped its jaws, trying to grab one of Bill's boots. Bill pressed his back hard against the trunk, clinging like a cat caught in a flood. His Winchester, which he had hung on a branch above him, slipped free the moment the tree shook again. He watched helplessly as the rifle tumbled through the air, struck a root, and bounced into the dirt below. Then suddenly, perhaps deciding Bill could wait, the beast let go. It dropped to all fours, landed heavily, and turned there with the sudden focus of a predator that remembered the easier target. The Mustang was screaming, kicking the walls of the overhang in panic. The bear charged. It hit the doors so hard that both hinges flew off. Boards splintered like matchsticks. The bear shoved its massive head inside and bit down, tearing away a whole section of the frame. Wood cracked between its teeth. Even from the tree, Bill could hear the wet crunch of timber breaking. He tried to reload the Hawken. His hands were shaking so violently that half the powder spilled over his fingers, darkening the bark. The round balls slipped from his grip and rolled off the branch into the darkness. His palms were slick with sweat. Another crash. The support beams gave way. The overhang collapsed inward, buried under the weight of the bear. The Mustang wailed, a sound Bill had never heard from him before. That was it. Bill didn't think. He jumped. He fell through the branches, hit the ground hard and rolled, but he forced himself onto his knees and lunged for the Winchester lying a few feet away. The bear was dragging the horse by the leg now, pulling him through broken wood and mud. The Mustang's hooves clawed at the ground, kicking up wet earth. Bill raised the Winchester. He exhaled once and fired. The first shot hit the bear in the lungs. It dropped instantly, then surged up again as if the bullet had only insulted it. It roared and charged at full speed, tearing up chunks of ground with every step. Bill stood. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He planted his feet, worked the lever, and fired again. The round smashed into its shoulder, turning a patch of fur dark and wet. The bear closed half the distance. Another lever pull. Another blast. This one struck its chest, staggering it sideways. But still it came. Bill's final shot came almost on instinct. He didn't hear the rifle, didn't feel the recoil. He only watched the bullet strike the bear's skull and saw the animal finally collapse at his feet. Silence. But Bill wasn't done. Shaking, panting, nearly blind with adrenaline, he fired 3 more rounds into the bear's head, each one echoing through the clearing like a hammer on an anvil. Only when the hammer clicked dry did he stop. Breathing hard, he dropped the Winchester and ran to his horse. Bill knelt beside the Mustang, his breath fogging in the cold spring night. The horse's leg was swollen and torn, where the bear's jaws had crushed down. Bill tore open his old canvas kit and worked with what he had. First, he washed the wound with whiskey, the only clean liquid he trusted. The horse jerked and kicked weakly, but Bill held him steady.
Easy.
He packed the worst of the bite marks with mashed spruce needles and clean moss, the old frontier poultice he'd once seen a village hunter use. Over that, he sprinkled a pinch of gunpowder, not to ignite, but to dry the wound and kill whatever rot spring might bring. Then he wrapped the leg tight with torn strips of wool from his spare blanket. After that, he tended to himself. His palms were scraped raw from sliding down the tree. His arms were striped with cuts from splintered bark. He poured whiskey straight onto them and hissed as the burn sank deep. Finally, he took one long drink. The second went down easier. By the third, the tremor in his hands stopped. Bill sat beside the horse for hours, feeding the fire, keeping watch with the Winchester resting across his legs. The adrenaline drained out of him like water from a cracked barrel. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the dark. Bill's eyelids grew heavy, and at some point, exhaustion dragged him under. He slept sitting up, his shoulder against the horse, the rifle balanced across his lap. He awoke hard on the cold ground. A firm shove pressed against his ribs. The Mustang stood above him, nudging him insistently with its head. Bill blinked, disoriented, then realized the horse was thirsty. He grabbed the old metal bucket from beside the cabin, trudged to the nearby stream, filled it to the brim, and carried it back. The horse drank deep, snorting between gulps. Bill checked the bandages and tightened them carefully. The swelling had gone down a little. Not much, but enough to give him hope. Only then did Bill turn toward the massive dead bear, lying in the open, stiff with the chill of dawn. "You ugly bastard," he said, walking up to it. He drew his hunting knife and got to work. The hide was thick and stubborn, but he peeled it off inch by inch. The bear was enormous, close to 1,100 pounds, the biggest he had ever seen. From one of the massive forepaws, he cut off 3 claws, long as carving knives. He drilled a hole in each and strung them on a strip of rawhide, tying the makeshift necklace around his neck. Then he spread the hide wide on a frame of branches, scraped the fat, and began rendering it down. The smell of hot tallow filled the clearing. He worked silently, the look of a man who had just survived something far bigger than himself. As the first full day of spring warmed the trees around him, Bill's thoughts drifted toward the coast, toward the tiny harbor town at the edge of Kodiak, where fur traders waited with heavy purses. He touched the muskrat pelts, fox hides, the otters strapped to the saddle, and the giant bear hide now stretched out in the sun.
It is time.
He muttered.
It is time to go.
The horse healed faster than Bill expected. Each day the Mustang walked a little steadier, breathed a little easier, and after 2 weeks the wound had closed clean and strong. Bill patched up the old cabin before leaving. Someone else might need shelter in these woods someday. Then he loaded every pelt onto the Mustang's back and stood for a moment in front of the doorway. "Take care of whoever comes next," he murmured to the empty cabin. then swung into the saddle and started down the trail. The long ride back took days. He camped beside creeks and under cedar branches, staring up at the stars each night while the fire cracked. Half a year alone in the wilderness had changed him. He couldn't tell whether he was returning to civilization because he wanted to, or because he needed to. But the thought that kept circling in his head wasn't about Seattle or Portland. It was Wrangell, the frontier outpost where, months ago, he had overheard trappers talking about true big game, wolves the size of ponies, moose with antlers like gates, elk herds that thundered across valleys, beavers thick as dogs, and maybe, just maybe, a stray bison pushing farther west than it should. Maybe it's time I find out if those stories are true. When he finally saw the harbor, smoke rising from chimneys and the masts rocking in the wind, he felt both relief and regret. First thing, he unloaded the horse, patted its neck, and walked straight toward the fur buyer's stall. The man's eyes widened.
16 otter, 18 fox, 9 marten. Lord above, you've been busy.
Then he saw the bear hide.
That one,
The buyer said, voice suddenly sharp.
I'll pay heavy for it. More'n it's worth even. You bring me that hide.
Bill shook his head.
Not for sale.
He tied the hide back onto his pack horse and walked through the busy street to the old trader, the one who'd once sold him a wool blanket, 2 hides, and the knife he'd promised to repay with a bear pelt. As soon as Bill stepped inside, the old man's face lit up.
Oh, there you are, young man. How's been the season? Any wolves? Any deer? Bears, perhaps?
Bill chuckled.
In those woods, nothing but fish and birds. Not a deer, not a wolf.
Then he dragged the huge hide from his shoulder and dropped it on the counter with a heavy thud.
Here's my promise, old man.
The trader's jaw fell open.
Oh, my goodness, I knew it.
He ran a hand over the matted fur and shook his head in disbelief.
I never doubted you for a second.
Bill thanked him, turned to leave, when the old man called after him.
Bill, and where will you go now?
The mountains are calling, but not these ones. I'm heading to Wrangell. Heard there's real big game up there. Wolves, elk, moose, beavers, maybe even a lost bison. I want to see for myself.
Good luck, young man. I hope we meet again someday.
With a grin, Bill headed toward the cargo ship where men were loading crates and ropes creaked under weight. He'd earned enough on the pelts that paying passage for himself and his horse barely made a dent. As he stepped onto the gangplank, he looked back at the thick green tree line of the island, his home for half a year, the place that had nearly killed him and shaped him all the same. A man learns 2 truths in the wilderness. First, the world is bigger than he'll ever be. Second, that's exactly why he has to keep moving. Bill touched the bear claws hanging around his neck, settled his Winchester at his side, and walked aboard. Wrangell, and whatever waited beyond it, was calling.